Say 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Harry, it's you.
Hello, everyone. I'm Harry Lennox. I had the great honor of playing perhaps the greatest political find of my life. As a Chicagoan born and raised, we had a lot of local heroes, people like Harold Washington and Jesse Jackson, and the Nation of Islam was there, of course, Oscar de Priest. And so I had very little exposure to Adam Clayton Powell Jr., and very little exposure to his father and what had been accomplished at the church, and in that whole, really that part of the country, what was going on in New York. But that said, the genius of this man does not escape me as a grown man. I think in a lot of ways, it takes a mature politician, an astute observer of the political winds in the way that the United States works as an institution and as a machine, to understand precisely how this man was able to navigate and to accomplish more than any other individual, irrespective of race, irrespective of time or era, who constructed really the United States as we know it. In many ways, I like to think the United States is still a very young country. It has a record of a couple hundred years now, but in reality, as constituted, the plurality, the actual democracy, the rights of all of its citizens to participate fully was engineered by Adam Clayton Powell Jr. And so I have, learned very, very much more in that time. There are many heads here that will have much more intimate details of that, but to embody and to have the opportunity, the privilege to embody such a mind and such a spirit was perhaps the single greatest privilege of my life. And I hope there are very, very many more versions of telling his story, live and taped and filmed, because it certainly merits a lot more attention than most people know. So that's what I have to say.
Thank you, Harry. Let's start with this all started with. Let's start with Adam III. He spent many, many years with his father. He as an adult. I think you in MIT and taking trips back and forth to Washington and elsewhere in Harlem with your father. He passed away April 4th, 1972. And in 1973, I believe, was the first time you were approached about optioning it for a movie. And you had the opportunity, and I think it was the ABC Movie of the Week, and they had Billy D. Williams attached to play Adam Clayton Powell, Adam III.
You can do the arithmetic. This is the 20th anniversary of Keep the Faith, Baby, and it's the 50th anniversary of our father's death. So it took 30 years to bring that story to the screen. NBC had an early interest because they had done a 1-hour primetime special called an NBC White Paper, Adam Clayton Powell. My father thought that was very funny that there'd be a white paper about him, but with Chet Huntley. But they were sort of going back and forth. So you're right. ABC came in for the Movie of the Week with Billy D. Williams. NBC came back after that. They were doing a lot of miniseries then. And they did one on Martin Luther King. And they said, we'll do Adam Clayton Powell right after Martin Luther King. And the MLK series ran in February of 1978 and did not get much of an audience. And so that was the end of NBC's involvement. They said, this isn't going to work.
Yeah,
this isn't going to work. Columbia came in, different studios came and went. But finally it was Paramount and Showtime that stepped up.
Okay. Right, and that point, so many years passed by until 1991, and that's when Adam IV took a second run for city council. They had just redistricted and expanded city council in New York due to charter reform in a U.S. Supreme Court decision, which eliminated the Board of Estimate due to violating one person, one vote. and they expanded city council from 35 to 51. And East Harlem was basically its own seat. And Adam Cito decided to run for that, and he called me. I had been running around the country as a brand new political consultant campaign manager. I spent 3 years in Detroit and San Jose. Went over to San Jose, did a campaign, and came back in the beginning of 91 wanting to get some rest. And I told my siblings, do not tell anybody I'm back in New York. And then the phone rings, and it was Adam Powell IV, and he says, I hear you're back. And I'm like, how the hell you know I'm back? Oh, I saw your brother Brian uptown. He happened to mention it. And he says, you remember back in the days we were running around, you were chief of staff to Patterson, and Adam was with city controller Holtzman. He says, you promised me that when I ran for office that you help me out. Well, I'm calling that in. And so I had to jump in, became his campaign manager. We had a really tough campaign. We actually lost by 34 votes, sued for a new election, spent a month at the Board of Elections and found 1,000 people who should not have voted in the Democratic primary. And we went to, got all the way to, went to the lower court and then appealed to the Supreme Court, the Court of Appeals, and we won a new election. And they told us on a Thursday that we were having a new election the next Wednesday. But after we won, and that started Adam's political career. And at the end of the next day after we won, he and I were in the storefront. And I asked him, how come no one has ever done a movie about your father? And he told me about the history of your brother, Adam III. And I said, man, and I said, these magic words, I know Monty Ross, we can get a movie done. And so I'm going to take it over to Monty, because that's what, that was my call, the next call to kind of really start this off, because Adam and I couldn't have done anything. So Monty, talk about that call and what happened afterwards.
Well, I just want to say, not only was it a call, but you know, just a little backstory there. One of the things that was so important is that Garfield, you don't remember, I met you when Spike and I were raising funds for She's Gotta Have It,
Yep.
And you were in Harlem, and we came to this office. I remember it was an office. It was hot.
Storefront.
There were fans blowing, and I remember you had on your tie and everything. But you know, the long story short, you know, you were like speaking really in quiet tones, and you were just being really supportive of what we were doing, and you know, and so from that day, you made an impression on me, and then, you know, I think the thing about what Spike and I did at that time was not only was She's Gotta Have It successful, but then it was weird that we got on a roll. And so with Do the Right Thing, School Days, you know, and so each time out, we were building, you know, the kind of films that were institutional. They represented, you know, a part of African-American life that had been talked about, you know, in certain, you know, Hollywood corridors, but never actually, you know, put forth. So this was an opportunity each time out. So School Days introduced us to HBCUs and what that lifestyle was about. Do the Right Thing talked about confrontation and what was going on, you know, in a neighborhood in Bedford-Stuyvesant. And then when you get to Malcolm X, when we got to Malcolm X, now that was the first time that the nation and the world actually got to see Malcolm X, not as they had seen him in book, read about him in books, you know, short movies, cassette tapes, his cassette tapes were very popular. But this would be the first time that we would see that presence of Malcolm X. So it was at that particular time, you know, in what we were doing, that I always wanted to do something in and around our pivotal, iconic heroes to the Black community, right, and to others. And so even as a boy growing up in Omaha, Nebraska, Adam had an influence, you know. you know, he was just, you know, and you got to think about it. A kid in Omaha, Nebraska, growing up, you know, you're looking for all kinds of heroes, you know. And I just remember my sister and I always debating, you know, which hero we liked. So basically, what happened? I had that reference of Adam Powell through Jet magazine, through Ebony magazine, you know, and hearing Tony Brown's journal talk about him, right, and all of the emerging media that happened. So now to be at the forefront of delivering Malcolm X to the public, you know, at a volatile time in America. And when you made the call to me, I was more than ready. I was like, let's go. Because as we all know in Hollywood, what really happens is that when you're hot, and you have to get in there and find a support. And I found a support. I was found a support through Dennis Green, who was at Showtime. And as soon as I walked Dennis Johnson, my bad. Dennis Johnson, he says, I heard you want to do the Adam Clayton Powell story. He said, I want to do that story too. And 5, 6, 7 minutes later, it was just like that. And we had the option.
Well, I mean, how did he know? You mean you reached? I thought not your manager that reached out to him, or
it was? Yeah, I had signed with UTA at the time. I had signed with them, and they said, "Well, what do you want to do?" And I said, "Well, I'd like to do the Adam Clayton Powell story." So they set up a meeting with him. Now, how their connection to Dennis, I didn't know. They just called me back and said, "Hey, look, Dennis Johnson wants to see you." I'm like, "Okay, bet." And I flew out and met with him, and in a short amount of time, that's how that happened. You know?
Well, actually, we attended Adam the Fourth. Did we not attend the meeting in New York City with Dennis Johnson?
Oh, you did? Oh, go ahead.
That, but yes, probably.
Yeah, was it just you and I?
A long time.
Okay, this is really interesting. This is the first time hearing this. That you met with him. Did you meet with him before I called you, Monty, or after I called you?
No, remember, because we were doing all those videos for GZA and the Wu-Tang Clan. And so I remember being at home in my apartment in Brooklyn, and you called me, you said, "Hey, you want to do it?" I said, "Sure." And then we met with the brothers, and we got everything ironed out. And then I went to LA. I remember I had something in LA. Like I said, the agency had set up the meeting, and I went out and I talked to Dennis, and he said, "Yep, let's do it." You know, because I didn't know, but you know, you also did the Pullman Porters.
Yeah, 10,000 Black Men Named George.
Right. So I did, you know. So we talked about. You just talked about, you know, the movie of the week, right? And it did. I remember when Paul Winfield, I believe, played Martin Luther King on television, but I had no idea that they were actually doing that one as well. So I think it was a part of Dennis's plan, you know, to do those movies on some level. How it all came about, I don't know. I just know that, you know, when I pitched it, he was totally on board, you know, right away.
Yeah, when we met with him, he had mentioned that you know, he was from Westchester, which is a northern suburb of New York City.
Mm-hmm.
And so he was aware. He was, you know, a few years older than me, so he was very aware of Adam Clayton Powell. But he also said that the Jerry Offsay, the president of Showtime, who lived in Long Island, you know, the southern suburb of New York City, he was enamored of Adam Clayton Powell, having, you know, been a teenager when he was in you know, plastic. He said he was plastered all over the tabloids, the Daily News and the Post. During that time. Interesting that they had it. So it seems that we've solved, not a mystery, but seems they already had Adam Clayton Powell on their minds. And actually,
one issue always,
because they said that they got pitched by another producer, and that was Harry Ufland, and they matched us up with Harry Ufland. Harry Ufland being a very successful agent and producer and partner with Robert De Niro and Martin Scorsese. He grew up in Inwood, which is a northern suburb of Manhattan, northern neighborhood of Manhattan. So he was very familiar with Adam Clayton Powell because he was in his congressional district, growing up in his congressional district. So yeah, so that okay, that kind of adds a little bit of news to this because I wasn't aware that Adam Clayton Powell's already on their slate.
One of the problems always was casting. Who can play Adam Clayton Powell? And of course, in the casting meetings, someone would say, "Oh, Denzel, right?" Of course, they want Denzel for everything. But there was one casting meeting where they're trying to figure out who can play Adam Clayton Powell. And I said, "Well, my father actually had a view about that." He said, "Oh, really?" I said, "Yes." There was a movie in the 1950s, Advising Consent. And based on a book about Washington, D.C. And in the book, one of the characters is sort of based on my father. And so in a news conference after the movie came out, he was asked, "Congressman, aren't you in this new movie, Advising Consent?" And he sort of puffed on his cigar and he said, "But who could play me? Cesar Romero?" And Cesar Romero, he played the Joker on television in Batman, and he had been a big leading man in the 40s and 50s. Yeah. But the response of the studio head was, "Oh, that's interesting. We could go Latino. Jimmy Smits."
And there would have been protests in Harlem, not East Harlem, of course, which is otherwise known as Spanish Harlem. But let's talk about the casting. I mean, we're going to jump around a little bit. I met Harry when I first came to LA, when I moved to LA in 1993. Dear friend of mine, still, Sterling Williams, knew Harry from a play. He was an actor too, a play. And he calls me one day and says, "Man, this guy I know wants to play Powell in your movie." I'm like, "Well, we're not even there yet, in terms of casting, but who are you talking about?" "Oh man, the brother from the Five Heartbeats." This and that, because everybody loved the Five Heartbeats, everybody, and his character absolutely, was one of the favorites. So he asked me to come by one Saturday afternoon, his apartment in Hollywood, and there I first met Harry. So Harry, you can go on from there.
Well, I remember that meeting. I had directed Sterling in a play of the Five Heartbeats. So in that capacity, he was an actor under my direction, having been in the movie. And but it was a lovely person, and I remember that meeting. And being excited. It was interesting because the first time I really was aware of Adam Clayton Powell Jr., the great, was because of in a speech, I think, Message to the Grassroots. Malcolm X mentions him, and it's a very interesting. I had been playing Malcolm for many years. In a stage play called The Meeting. Mm-hmm. And, but that said, I kept hearing, and so I became fascinated. Who was this guy that was at the Cobo the other day? So it raising all kinds of hell. And so I read up on him. I was like, "Oh, this is a bad man. I'd love to play this guy," because at that point, they were doing the movie of Malcolm and all of these things, and Denzel had played him. I didn't care for the casting of that, just to be honest with you, by the way. The being called Detroit Red and all of that. But that said, all due respect there, Monty, to your movie, but which I enjoyed. But that said, I also think that Cesar Romero would have been a magnificent Adam Clayton. He looks just like him, for one thing. And Cesar Romero was a terrific leading man. He'd done some movies with Ginger Rogers, and he's a very dashing sort of fellow. And so I think your father's idea, Adams, was fantastic in it. Of course, he might have been a little long, and I don't think he was alive when we finally got around to it. Right. Maybe he was. But that said, I remember that the opportunity came up, and I had been doing some bigger profiled things. And I realized that maybe I actually had a shot at this. And this is the very interesting story. And I don't know if everybody on here knows this, probably Adam III knows. But I was doing the original person that they wanted to get was Brian Stokes Mitchell, mm-hmm. who would have been another great piece of casting. You know, very fair skin. You know, you could be many ethnicities and this sort of thing. Terrific actor, but he wanted to go and do radio golf on Broadway. He had the option to go and do it, and I had been doing radio golf. Actually, this is King Hedley II. Let me get this right. King Hedley II and Keep the Faith Baby were happening about the same time. And so they gave Brian the option to go to Broadway with it. I had been playing the part in LA, and I had wanted the Broadway option. So Brian decided to go and do that, and that left the part of Adam Clayton Powell open. And so it was between me and a couple of other guys, none of whom I thought, you know, were either tall enough or were fair-skinned enough or what have you, or could, you know, have that option. Very good actors. I remember, you know, pals, people I knew that could do the job acting-wise. But I thought that it might come down to right time. You know, this is a matter of timing. I was of the age where I could play younger or older, knowing the scope of the story, which I thought was extraordinarily well written by Art Washington. And very, you know, fascinating sort of, you know, journalist comes, and that's a way of going back into. So structurally, I was very much a fan of it. I knew it would give me a chance to show some range that I wouldn't otherwise. So I became determined to get the part, and I had to go in and win it. And I had, like, you know, 2 or 3 rounds of auditions. And by the last time around, I felt, well, you know, if I were Paramount and Showtime, I'd cast me. So there was the lesson. I have to say, this is the fact. The very last thing I'll say about the casting is that I never wanted a part so much that was so valuable that I got, and I'm glad it was this one. And you know, there's nothing, you know, 600,000 views. I had no idea it was up to that. The last time I looked, it was a couple 100,000. Somehow it got online. But the fact that people are responding to it, that's organic. And you like you look at other movies like that, and they don't have that many views. That's organic, because I think the world really could use somebody like Adam Clayton Powell Jr. again. There is nobody like him. There hasn't been anybody like him. The closest thing that came to Adam Clayton Powell Jr. was Harold Washington. Mm-hmm. You know, somebody that was actually a populist that could do. So to be able to sort of, you know, as I say, I wanted that part really, 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 really desperately. And I'm, you know, eternally grateful that I got it.
Well, I remember the casting session that we had with you and 3 other brothers. I mean, all actors who I freaking
very good actors.
You know, one in particular who's very popular in commercials.
Yeah.
Which I was surprised that he would come, because he had certainly the height and the manner and the presence. But my brother said, "Brother, you're darker than me." I mean, you know, why? I always wonder about you actors going into parts where, you know, like so and so doing Nina Simone, when Nina Simone's a dark-skinned, beautiful, wide-nosed, wonderful lips sister, but you're not.
Right, you're not those things. You're a great actor.
And the audience responded like, "No, we're not accepting this." But we had really, really good bunch of guys to audition. People have to know the context of what happened during that time period. There was going to be a writer's strike. So the studios, which have a quota of movies to put out every year for their investors, they started digging up. They started looking at all their stuff they had in development and said, "What's a go?" And our movie had been in development for 8 years, mostly because of the financing model that they used. Showtime would pay 50% for film's production, and then try to get a European partner to take up the other 50%. And back then, black didn't sell, was the myth that they were propagating. Certainly, Black Panther just totally annihilated all of that, and in other movies. So they were in a hurry to get films done, and fortunately enough, we had a good third version of the script. I believe it was 3rd or 4th, and we were further enough along for them to start greenlighting. And I suppose the first hire they made was the director, Doug McHenry, But I also heard that Monty, that Spike was had a meeting with Jerry Offstate, the president, to do the movie. Now, if I wanted Spike in the movie, I would have called Spike, and this would have been a Spike Lee joint rather than a Monty, Adam, and Jeffrey joint.
Yeah. But we also have to mention that because you talked about the financial model there. At the time, Vanessa Williams was still resonating heavily both on the USA side and internationally. And I just remember that when she said yes, because I believe she was like 3 months pregnant, and when she said yes, it just seems like the wheels turned so quickly. Mm-hmm. And the next thing I know that we were off in production. So, every time, because I think I follow her. And so every time, the February rolls around, I'm always like, yeah, thank you for, participating in the movie, because at that point, everything was not necessarily a standstill, but they were just still really on the fence. But when she said yes, I mean, it just everything took off.
I think that working with Vanessa was fantastic. I was there with Toronto, and she would take 5 or 6 takes, but by the 8th, 9th, 10th, she's just a whole nother person. It was really very fascinating to see her process. But she, of course, you put their pictures side by side with Hazel Scott, looks nothing like her, but her star power was what they were looking for. But speaking of casting, Adam III, you're actually in the movie as a young, I guess about 12, 13-year-old. What was that like?
Well, it's an interesting scene because the writer, Art Washington, kept doing more and more research. And he said the more he learned, the closer he could get to the truth, the better the script became. And that scene with me is actually the one that didn't happen, because we couldn't figure out a way of actually explaining what did happen, which was that my father had a great line. My mother was in Paris, and she kept extending. In those days, she sent telegrams. She would send a telegram saying, my European manager says I can get Sal Playal if I stay another 3 weeks. Then a telegram. And my European manager says he can get me this if I stay another 2 weeks. And then she sent for her piano. And that's when my father said, your mother sent for the piano. I don't think she's coming back anytime soon. But on casting, Harry and Vanessa were terrific. That first scene that was shot in the nightclub scene in Toronto, and I remember walking out onto the soundstage, and unbeknownst to me, the wardrobe mistress had decided that these are 2 famous people. We have photographs of them throughout the period that we're depicting here. So we can actually make the actual clothes they were wearing in August of 1944, whatever the date is. So I walked onto the soundstage, and Harry and Vanessa had been in makeup for hours, it seemed. And so there's Harry looking like my father, dressed in my father's suit. And there's Vanessa looking like my mother, sort of, and dressed in one of my mother's dresses. And I don't know what my facial expression was, but Harry came over and he put his arm around me. He said, son, if you were in analysis, this would be a breakthrough moment.
Oh my goodness! So when you met the young man who was playing you, did you give him any pointers?
I think he's talking about me, Adam. I'm the young man.
No, Adam III. When you met the young man who played you, did you give him any pointers?
No, not really. He really had down the what he needed to do, and I talked about a little bit with him. And you might recall his mother was always on the set also. A few things about what I might have been doing at that time, and the scene where we have our hands and Harry reaches over and says, "You're a Powell man now." that's something which was quite real.
All right, fascinating. Now, Adam the Fourth, you actually were in it twice. You were an extra in the first scene. Actually,
That scene
the
that,
nightclub scene he
That
described.
scene
We
that
were.
my brother was talking about.
That was the first day of shooting. I was in that scene too, where they cut me. They cut me in the Bimini scene too, where I was with Harry playing dominoes. I guess it just wasn't my. I should have been in the editing room. But
yeah,
the
I wasn't looking to be a part in it or anything. It happened to be the first scene, as you mentioned, and it was Monday morning in Toronto. Now I have to drive to Albany, which is a 5-hour, like a 6-hour drive, to be there on time for 2:00 and not miss a meeting. I had a perfect attendance record, and I'm saying my goodbyes, to everybody. And Doug McHenry pulls me aside, says, "Adam, you're not going anywhere." I said, "Doug, I gotta go." Like, no, I'm gonna put you in the film. I'm gonna put you in the scene. Yeah, I figured it would be 10, 15 minutes. By the way, I already had a suit and tie. The only thing they changed was a tie because I had one of them colorful things, and they put a solid gold tie. So the thing took about 2 hours. I don't know, an hour and a half. Seemed like it took forever. And I drove after that like 100 miles. I drove, the first hour in Canada was kind of slow, but once I hit New York, I knew I had the best excuse for the troopers. If they stopped me, hey, I'm an assemblyman. I'm late for session. So I hit the gas and fortunately made it on time. But that was the first scene, and it was a great part to be there. And I used to be going back and forth to Toronto for those 4.5 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
But it bears to mention a couple of things. This, I believe, as you and I, Garfield, have talked about, was maybe one of the first, and not the first, all-black film. When you look at the four of us, the Keep the Faith Productions, Monty, you, my brother, and I. When you look at the cast, Harry, Vanessa, everybody, Doug McHenry, the director that Showtime, the producer, that Showtime assigned Art Washington. So it was an all-black cast, which was good. And I believe it might have been the most expensive film by Showtime up to that date. It started as a $2 million project, but correct me if I'm wrong, it went up to $6 million.
Yes.
Which I believe to that date, 2001, had been the most expensive Showtime movie ever.
Well, it did cost us because they couldn't find a European partner to finance the other part of it. They had Showtime went to their sister company, Paramount Television.
Correct.
They put a portion, and then they went to the sister company, Blockbuster, and they sold Blockbuster our video rights, that is the producers, which we would have gone in royalties from. Well, that was gone. They gave that to Blockbuster for the balance of the $6 million, and that's how they financed. Again, this was going on very, very quickly during the threatened writers' strike, and all these productions were being financed and casted very, very quickly. Before the end of the first quarter of the following year
and the end result, if I may, was wonderful. Obviously, it was a great movie. For some reason, Showtime didn't put that much money out of the $6 million allocated whatever into marketing. I guess they figure in New York it will market itself. Everybody knew Adam Clayton Powell. If you recall, Fidel, the movie about Fidel Castro, came out around the same time. Fidel was all over New York.
Yeah, but that was amazing.
Bus shelters, the pay phones in those days, the public phones, all over. Fidel. Correct me if I'm wrong, but Keep the Faith, Baby and Fidel's ratings were almost the same. And this was with very little marketing.
I don't recall. Was Fidel a cable movie or a theatrical?
No, it was a Showtime movie.
Showtime movie.
Yeah, Fidel.
I mean, we had a billboard up.
And I believe the ratings were on par, which was amazing, given the fact that it had so much Fidel, had so much marketing, and yet Keep the Faith, Baby was just kind of like a word of mouth.
Yeah, we had a billboard up in LA on Sunset. I think that was the only one that I'm aware of.
Yep.
And yeah, they could have if they had caucused with us better, it would have been better. Like for instance.
Yeah. There was just a lot of interest. There was a lot of interest to hear the story about my dad, Adam Clayton Powell Jr.
Well, here's the book, Adam by Adam.
Yes.
This is
that's
not
his autobiography
that the movie's based upon, but this is not the original cover. This is a reprint. I had been talking to
my brother and I reprinted that about 25 years ago.
Well, this is reprinted at the because of the movie. I believe this cover because there's I think Adam III did a revised forward, and it says at the bottom, "See the Showtime original movie." Now, I had been talking with them, for at least 2 or 3 years before the production, trying to get some kind of synergy going. And they just like, well, let's wait. Who am I? They probably just really thinking, we'll talk to the people who got money at Showtime. So they apparently did it eventually, and which brought about, helped us, get that on the cover. You recall that you and I did the 2008 100th birthday anniversary. We had that week long of activities. I contacted Showtime and talked to the chairman, and I said, "Dude, your sister company's Blockbuster. Blockbuster is a partner in this movie. I went to Blockbuster on 125th Street, right down the block from Adam Clayton Powell Boulevard, and they don't have the movie.
Yeah,
it's not even a poster." I said, "You put a poster up on 125th Street because you remember that whole block right down the block from the Adam Clayton Powell State Office Building, the tallest structure in the freaking neighborhood. That whole block had vendors on the sidewalk.
Yes,
so
the street vendors,
tremendous." I said, "You put the darn poster in your window, you're gonna get traffic. Why? You really got to have somebody inside these corporations that really is dedicated and committed to your project."
That's precisely my point. Without that dedication, this movie, the ratings were through the roof. The interest, even 20 years later, is there because the story needed to be told. As you well mentioned, this project. This is the 20th anniversary of the movie, the release, Keep the Faith, Baby. The project began about 31 years ago. The effort began 49 years ago, as my brother will put it. And this was a story that needed to be told. Yes, there were a lot of documentaries and many biographies and so on and so forth, but never a motion picture. And it was important. I mean, my dad, Adam Clayton Powell Jr., wrote the blueprint for activism, wrote the blueprint for progressives, which is now a fancy and popular word. And so this man's story really needed to be told. And so here we are, and hopefully more of this will continue.
Well, we did
and to your point about
we did get the New York Daily News television guide, Sunday television guide. So that was a nice one. Go ahead. I'm sorry, Adam.
Well, to your point about promotion, they didn't pay for a Washington premiere. That was actually done at the museum. They didn't pay for a Los Angeles premiere. That was done at USC.
Now you did that one. You did a panel with Quincy Jones in LA. Unfortunately, I was stuck in New York. I couldn't make that. And the congressman that's depicted in the movie, who's putting forth the motion to investigate Adam Clayton Powell Jr., actually attended from San Diego.
Yes, Lionel Van Deerlin, USC alum. He came, and it's interesting how people's memories might be a little different from what reality was. He said, "Well, I think we might not have made exactly the right decision there." And in fact, Dan Rostenkowski, who was the chairman of House Ways and Means Committee well before Charlie Rangel, he pulled me into a committee meeting once. It was a markup session, so everybody's going, and he says, "Oh, it's okay. He's Adam's kid," and Dan Rostenkowski turned to me and he said, "Back when your father was excluded from Congress, we didn't have these fancy voting machine things that we have now in the House of Representatives. And I think that maybe the totals were wrong because I can't find anybody now who voted against it."
Ed Koch, former mayor Ed Koch of New York, he would always tell me every time he saw me, and he repeated the story 3 or 4 times to me, but he said, when your father's vote to unseat him took place, it was my first vote in Congress. He had just been elected, and I voted for your father. I thought he got a raw deal, so I voted no on the exclusion vote.
Well, speaking of a raw deal, let me just I'm going to tell the story as quickly as I can. When we had to sue for a new election, we had to get a stenographer to give us the transcript of the first hearing with the referee at the Board of Elections. And Adam and I and our lawyer, Henry Berger, were trying to figure out how we're going to do this in a short period of time. We had a very, very limited window, I think only 48 hours. And so Henry hands me a blank check and says, well, you got to go get this. And I'm like, who am I? And he says, you're the campaign manager. You got to do what you got to do. So I was figuring out who I had to rob and beat up. The very next morning at 6 a.m., I went to the court clerk in Manhattan, great old stately building. And I go find the clerk, and the place is just bustling with people. I mean, people just, wow, it was just incredibly amount of people in suits and dresses and so on. And here he is, and he's the calmest guy there, pure bureaucrat with the wool sweater with the sleeveless and the red tie and bald head and everything except the thing, the hat, the light thing hat. And he's just sitting there, miss all this calm, just writing. And I told him, hey, I'm here to get a transcript. We only have a very limited amount of time, and we just got to do this. And I'm making my spiel, and I just stopped. My daddy always say, make your pitch and just shut the hell up. And he just kind of sat there he must have looked at me what seemed like 2 minutes. And then he said, I always thought his father got a bad break. And just like that, he grabbed one of the stenographers, the guy passing by, and he says, where are you going? He says, I'm going to part so-and-so. He says, no, go with this young man and give him what he wants. And I spent the next 5 hours with him going through his back then, they didn't have the computers that the stenographers use today, which automatically transcribes. He had to go through all the stuff. And because I went to the hearing, I knew kind of exactly where it was and what parts we needed. And 5 hours later, I wrote it must have been a check for like $5,000 easily. And I went to a payphone and called Adam and Henry and told them we got it. And we were in court the next day. I think
this was a process that would take about a week, right? Or 2 weeks?
We got there because this man, and he was of age, to have known about it, but he thought about it. I mean, am I going to make an exception, for this guy in front of me? And he says, no, I'm not making it for him. Mm-hmm. I'm making it, in the memory, of Adam Clayton Powell. And the second instance was when we went to court, finally the Court of Appeals. And Saul Rudis was the opposing counsel, mm-hmm. and one of the appeals court judges, highest court in New York State. His name was
the appellate division. It was the appellate division. There's 5 judges.
Yeah, it was.
They have different departments. This was the first department.
Yeah, Kupferman, and he said, "Do you want me to recuse myself because I was a congressman and I voted in Powell's favor?"
Right.
Of course, they said, no, you have to recuse yourself. But all these things kind of happened. I mean, the legacy was definitely, Adam and I used to joke that, we got touched again, by his father's legacy, where people just, did things in our favor in order to keep his legacy going. We had talked about casting real quick back in a few minutes ago. And Adam, you had a second appearance when Harry is in Bimini and he picks up a photograph. And what does he say? Harry, do you remember what you said? Of all the lines you've said over the years?
He said,
pick up a photograph.
I remember.
I don't remember.
Fire in his eyes.
Say it again.
Look at the fire in his eyes. He's going to follow in my footsteps. And Doug McHenry, the director, was like, cut. He told Harry, you got to say, look at the fire in his eyes. Make it sound, powerful. And Harry went back and said, look at the fire in his eyes. He's going to follow in my footsteps. Yeah.
He spent many, many hours with Art Washington on the phone.
So, that was a real picture of him. It was just a photo, but yeah, we put that line.
No, but I tell you, we were trying to figure out how we're going to put you in the movie. And, I know we didn't, it wasn't a time travel movie, except to a certain degree with the reporter. But that's what he came up with. We just were trying to figure out something, man. And that's what he came up with. So I think they worked out. Those and not all the inside jokes. We mentioned Hattie, who was an old friend of your father's.
Well, if you recall, there was a travel in time with my father's older sister, but we couldn't fit all of that into the movie.
Well, how he treated, I'm not going to go through the details of my real objection was, but he did start with, that he was enamored of his older sister. She was very beautiful. She decided to pass for white. She was working as a secretary down in Wall Street, and she died at a young age, and was very affected by that. But his depiction of their relationship, which also resonated further into the movie, it just didn't work. It just didn't work.
It was a 2.5 hour version, and they had to nail it to 1 hour and 45 minutes or so.
Yeah, that script, that was in the first script.
There were a lot of scenes that were left out.
And I think it was consistent that we didn't, I think the rest of you guys.
Yeah, no, the final product was wonderful. Perfect.
Yeah.
I thought it was a great movie.
Yeah.
And accurate, because oftentimes you get these Hollywood movies that are, they just play loosely with the truth. I feel this movie was, can't say 100%, but very, very, very close to being accurate. I mean, every line, a lot of the lines were things that my father actually said.
Yeah.
And the scenes were things that actually happened in that way. So it was a good movie. It was a good product.
Well, what's everybody's favorite scene? Monty, you got a favorite scene?
Yeah, I think for me, definitely the speeches. Like there's a montage of speeches. Do I call y'all? All those the speeches really resonated, and the scene where he goes and meets with the gentleman who's in charge of the buses.
Mike Quill.
That's right. Yeah, Mike Quill. Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I love that scene and how it was all set up and shot. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Abner III. You got a favorite scene?
I love the scene with Mike Quill also. That if I were in your union, you'd be working for me. and you'll remember that a lot of the people in the crew in Canada couldn't quite believe that this was real. This really happened. And Harry had this great idea. He got a whole crate full of Atom by Atom and started handing them out to the crew so they could actually see it really happen.
I never got that book.
And another scene that actually really happened in real life, if you recall, was the scene of the big bash for A. Philip Randolph at Madison Square Garden. And the idea was that Fiorello LaGuardia was going to introduce A. Philip Randolph, and the idea was that A. Philip Randolph was going to announce that he was running for Congress in this newly designed congressional district for Harlem and Northern Manhattan. And so that was one of my favorite, all the scenes are favorite, but that one, when they told Reverend Powell, you'll be given the benediction. And he was like, no, I will introduce A. Philip Randolph. And then he went on, while he was introducing him, to declare himself a candidate for the congressional district. And after that, it was a wrap.
Well, that was my favorite scene too, because I remember how
that happened in real life. Yeah.
Well, Art was asking me, how are they going to try to get him off the stage? And I said, well, that's easy, because I worked in Harlem politics. We usually reserve the opening prayer and the closing prayer for a minister who might come in and demand to be on the program. Okay, so we throw that at them. I said, that's what we have the kid do. He said, so what happens from there? I said, well, this is 1940s. There's no cell phones. That aide will have to go run from Madison Square Garden across the street to the Pennsylvania Hotel and go up to the elevator and tell A. Philip Randolph that Powell's not cooperating. What do we do? And he wasn't going to do that because he was just about, the program is starting. I said, so Powell is just going to pull rank on him. Yeah, I'm not going to take that from you. He says, only A. Philip can tell me what to do. Okay. And he was inaccessible.
It was a great scene.
Then he goes on before Philip Randolph.
Yep.
And then Philip Randolph comes in, and he hears Powell just take it from him. I mean,
Yep.
just
It was actually
Harry,
a great speech.
Harry
nailed
it. The best shot I liked, the best angle was from behind.
Yes.
Because you just see, most people don't see that angle. Those of us who are politics, we see it all the time. But just to see Harry's back and this strong, tall
Yes.
guy taking over not just this audience, my people of Harlem,
Yes.
but the whole power structure just changed in that speech, and that's how I read to it. And I took the point of view of my sitting behind him, as I normally would, as in my career, and seeing it live, and how I
Yeah,
would.
that's one of the greatest
Oh
two,
my
three
goodness!
pieces in the movie, and Harry nailed it. I gotta
Yeah,
say.
it's just I think that was the highlight of, and then the next scene slows it down, because everybody just got to calm down now. The other scene was my favorite was him chasing the Southern congressman around
Yes.
around the congressional
Oh my
uh,
God.
chambers, and the
He's a
music was
congressman from
perfect.
Mississippi, I believe.
Yeah,
One of the
I
races.
can't remember his name.
I think.
Was it Bilbo from Mississippi?
Yeah, I think so. I think so.
Yeah, yeah.
And that really happened. That really happened.
really
It was we have contemporaneous reporting in the black press that was really happening.
Well, because the idea was that this racist congressman again told our father that in the elevator, don't you sit near me, you hear? This ain't New York. Southern rules govern here, which we put in the movie as well. So when my dad had an opportunity in Congress, he sat right next to him. And then the guy moved, very indignant, got up, moved across the aisle somewhere else. My dad got up and moved and sat right next to him again. And this happened 3 or 4 times. And I tell you, everybody, every time you show this movie, I mean, people just laugh. They love it because, my dad was just being an enigma, as he usually liked to say, being an enigma. And he just sat next to the dude until the guy just got up and left. And on his way out, our father offered him a cigar. Yeah, that was a great scene. That happened in real life.
Harry,
So I get to tell you my favorite scene?
sure.
I like all those scenes. By the way, we didn't. We gave Vanessa her duly appreciated and deserved love, but Russell Hornsby and Lance Reddick.
Oh yes.
I mean, these guys
Lance
are
is great.
so like These are a couple of my favorite actors, by the way. But that said, and my favorite scene was when Vanessa Williams comes in and brings me dinner and sits on my lap. Am I going to be fired? Am I canceled?
I'm sure he loved it.
Am I canceled, Garfield?
That was a nice scene.
Yeah.
No, that was a great scene.
Yeah, and Lance was great. Of course, he played the late New York County leader, the party boss, J. Raymond Jones, who was from the Virgin Islands. And Lance just nailed it. He was a great actor.
I first met Lance when I was in Toronto with the production. And, I seen him on some other stuff. Really didn't. Oh, The Wire. Oh, yeah, it was The Wire.
The Wire, right.
I walked up to him and said, hey, dude, introduced myself. And I said, you must be with J. Raymond Jones. He says, yeah. I said, well, do you know anything about him? No. I said, okay, we'll talk. And of course, this was after Doug McHenry said to me, after I think Adam was there, we met him for lunch when we first got there. He says, Garfield, don't you be telling any of these actors anything. That's my responsibility. Don't you talk to these actors about their characters. Okay. I said, sure, not a problem, man. No big deal. So when I met with Lance, I gave him my book called The Harlem Fox, which is an autobiography. It was out of print for many, many years. And I hunted it down. It was my only copy. And I gave him the book, and it's very dense. It's really very, very detailed. Jones, really went through, his a lot of details about his machinations. And so I gave him the book and one thing I told him was he is not a Powell underling. He is equal to Powell in his own right. So, don't let the dynamic between you guys be, you subservient to any way other like the other staffers are. And he played that.
I would agree. I think that what he had for me in looking at the PBS documentary about Adam Clayton Powell is that he had his bearing. He had the exact same sort of formal bearing. You know what I mean? Like this very proud brother from a kind of West Indian.
Oh, it's that.
That tradition.
Indian. Yeah,
Lance had that. I mean, he had that in spades. And
he didn't do the accent, although he might have an opportunity to do it because he's playing Wesley Holder in a movie about Shirley Chisholm. And Wesley Holder was the J. Raymond Jones of Brooklyn. He was the black power broker in Brooklyn.
If you go back in time, we're talking 1930s, 1940s, when a black man was the political machine in Manhattan, the party boss.
Yeah.
Emily Hall.
Harlem Fox. J.
Now,
Raymond
I recently tried to find the book on Amazon, and one guy was selling it for $900.
Mm.
So I called Lance and said, "Yo, dude, where's my book?" And he said, "Oh man, that's probably in storage in Brooklyn somewhere."
Of course, the next question is, where's my $900?
Either or, pal. Lance and I, we're on Facebook together, as well as I talked to him recently about a project I wanted to get him involved with. I'm doing I got a Wilmington 10 script, which I think is pretty good. But anyway, the rights have reverted back, to the brothers. The rights of Powell, and Harry had mentioned in the beginning about what about other projects should be made. You guys got any ideas?
Oh, about
Harry,
other
you ready?
projects? Other
About
projects?
another project.
Well, I've told you before, and I don't know how much I can share this with the public. I can certainly share with the public. I do believe that the period of time, because it's hard to do another bioepic.
We don't need another one.
I do believe that the period of time when he was chairman of the Education and Labor Committee between 1960, January 1st, 1961, and 1967 is a period that should be highlighted. That's a movie all on to itself. And a good title will be Mr. Chairman.
Well, Adam the Third, you actually lived through that period. What do you think?
I think that would be a terrific project. And I'm looking over in the screen and think, so Harry, you ready?
100%.
Chairman.
I would love to. You'd be interested just as an actor, and people have done this from time to time. Peter O'Toole, for example, playing King Henry II in Lion and Winter and Beckett. But you go back and approach. But I think to play your dad, starting from just a specific point in time as an older actor, and that'd be really I would love that.
1960, and we alluded to that in the movie when he cut the deal to make sure that he would get the chairmanship. He was in line because seniority dictated in those days, but because he was Adam Powell, he might not have gotten it. But 1960 through 1967, he was chairman again of the Education Labor Committee, which was so powerful that the committee in itself, and then my dad, that years later they broke it up. I understand now there's an education committee and a labor committee, two separate ones. 60 or so, or 60 plus piece of legislation, all passed by the committee, all passed the Congress and were signed into law. So, never one defeat. And these are laws that are still benefiting people to this day. Not just Black people, not just people of color, white people, everybody benefits from the help for higher education. Prior to that, in the 50s, you either went to a state university or you played ball and got an athletic scholarship, or your parents were rich or wealthy and could afford a private school. So, help for higher education. Equal pay for equal work, talk about that. I believe it was the first bill that was passed by Congress, signed into law. Of course, we still don't have equal pay for equal work for women, but we're getting there. And just so many other things. The minimum wage, which was increased fivefold, and so many other things which are still beneficial.
Also, the way he got some of those bills passed was really remarkable. He could count cards, but he could really count votes. And I remember standing at the Democratic cloakroom, which is if you're facing the speaker, it's the back left corner of the House chamber, and he'd be leaning against the brass railing there, looking around, and he'd say, "I need 3 more votes." He's looking around. He's my good friend over there, I think I can get his vote. And he would walk over and put his arm around him, offer a cigar, and then he came back. Okay, now I need 2 more. Oh, my good friend from, I think it was Arkansas. And I said, "Oh, you're not going to get his vote." He said, "Well, we'll see. He goes over and puts his arm around him. And he goes, no. Offers him a cigar. And he came back. He said, "Okay, now I only need 1 vote." I said, he's going to vote for you. No, he's agreed to walk off the floor.
And that's a story that needs to be told.
That's a master politician there.
But not only that, I think in terms of what we're speaking about, it would help solidify his place, as when we reflect, the civil rights movement, because a lot of time, and not only the civil rights movement, I mean, because his life was so, had so many, a lot of impact. But what I'm saying is, a lot of times it's, we'll start with, talking about certain figures, and they'll skip over Powell altogether. And I'm like, and since we've made the movie, I've always felt like, we got to figure out how to get Powell into the public discourse and conversation so that people can understand how the lineage happened and how a majority of the advancements have happened because of him. And that always bothers me. So yeah, this film I think would do that, because it's a very specific period that has impacted our lives since then.
Well, you find interesting you say it that way, because on a personal note, when Adam called me, Adam the fourth called me, surprisingly, hey, you're in town, and I'm running a campaign, and I want you to be my campaign manager. I had to do some thinking about, not how I was going to approach this, because I like to have a sense of mission, personal mission when I do things. Kind of creates the passion that you need to, really withstand projects that may take years and years. And I said to myself, I've heard about Powell all my life. My mother and father grew up in Harlem. My father on the East Harlem, a few blocks where Adam lives now, and my mother in what was then Mount Morris Park, now Marcus Garvey Park. And they grew up in the 30s and 40s and 50s in Harlem. And so I always knew about Adam Clayton Powell. And so I said to myself, if you really do this right, you can help bring this man's legacy into the 21st century and where it deserves to be. So that kind of in my head became my mantra, because all campaigns are tough. All campaigns are tough. And we had a pretty tough race. It wasn't a given, because we had a well-financed opponent whose brother was a big-time, Angelo Del Toro was a big-time assemblyman. He was the chairman and all that. And he had the money, and everybody, all the incumbents endorsed him. So we had a pretty tough race. And then to a certain degree, while we're in development with the film, I'm leaving California every other year or so to go run one of Adam's campaigns. He would call me and say, hey, man, I'm running for council, did council, because he ran for re-election. I didn't do that one. But he says, hey, man, I'm going to run for the assembly. What, you interested in coming on board? I said, of course.
You forgot Congress, 1994.
Anybody else to handle his campaign, because they wouldn't get the big picture. So every year, the assembly did that race, and then he ran for re-election. Borough president ran for that, and I came
Congress,
and I was going to do the Congress, and ran for Congress 3 times. I didn't really do the last time. He had another campaign manager, but and in every congressional race, I knew that at least one of the New York papers, hopefully the Times, and one of the national papers, hopefully the Washington Post, would do a story called "The Son Seeks Revenge," because Rangel had defeated his father, and that was a typical storyline. And it was guaranteed every campaign that they were going. I was going to see that twice, and every time it happened. Just 3 weeks before the campaign, that was a typical article. But in doing that, it became a big part of my career, defined my career as a campaign manager for doing his races, the ones we won, even the ones we lost. But it became a part of my effort to get the Powell name out there and keep it out there. And the best way, of course, of doing it was to have a living person and namesake, who decided to go the political route, and do the same things father did, and do good things.
In the day 1994, when they had that beautiful, beautiful bus all paint the Power for Congress, that we drove right up to Charlie Rangel's fundraiser at Tavern in the
It was Tavern on the Green in Central
Tavern on
Park.
the Green Central Park. Drove right up to his yearly fundraiser, and on the microphone, hey, Percy's son looked like he hated it. Basil Patterson actually laughed. He loved it. Yeah,
Because
yeah.
Basil was a trickster himself. Okay, that's the kind of stuff he would have done.
Yep.
When we were early on,
We didn't get
1985,
off the bus, but we pulled up right in front of people
Yeah.
walking into Charlie Rangel's, my opponent's fundraiser on the mic.
early 1985, when his son David Patterson was running for the state senate, and that was my first campaign as campaign manager. We were on 96th Street and Broadway, which is bustling, at night, and we were putting up our posters, and there were some posters of our opponent. And it was Basil that climbed up the pole and tore them down. And I ran up to him like, yo, man, he's still an older guy. Basil, come on, please don't do that. And I didn't want him to, get arrested. But Basil Patterson, former Secretary of State of New York, former Deputy Mayor of New York, former state senator, in his 60s, or almost 70, was up on a pole tearing down posters.
Yeah.
Yeah, but so he was a little trickster himself. So, gents, let's wind it up. What's been everybody's experience post Adam Clayton Powell, whether in relation to the film or what you guys doing these days?
Well, I know for me, every time I mention the Adam Clayton Powell story, I mean that's like people are highly, supportive of the film. They want to see it, and his story still resonates with them. So I always love, having that experience, and it was funny because my son, who is now 19, was born around the time that the film, was released. And now he's studying international relations himself at Queen Mary University in London. And so for me, I'm like, wow. So all of this was happening in and around the same time, my wife giving birth, and then you have a son who ends up over at Queen Mary University studying international relations. So to me, it's kind of, they're not connected, but in one sense, I'm just saying like, just around being able to do the film like this and finally having this film in the presence, of great audiences and people who like this type of story, to have this story out there and then to have a son, studying international relations, for me, it's just a very special, very special moment. And to meet you guys, that's the cool thing, because Jeffrey, Monty, can we use your production insurance? Because the Wu-Tang Clan can't get any equipment. And from doing those videos with Jeffrey, we were just doing a lot of music videos back to back. The conversation about Powell kept coming up, and when the opportunity struck, it happened. So I just look back at that time, and I really feel really cool, that I got a chance to meet Jeffrey, and then I got a chance to meet the brothers, and I'm like, man, I'm a fan of you guys. To be honest, I really am a fan of you guys. A kid from Omaha, Nebraska gets to hang out with some really cool people. Yeah. Oh man, that's what's up for me.
Well, real quick, Monty, I counted up the 3 videos we did for the Liquid Swords albums, which went platinum. So get your plaque.
Okay.
I counted them up on YouTube, the 3 videos, and they've got 1.2 million views.
Oh wow!
So not bad. We don't get any royalties, but we get bragging rights. Adam the Third, what you thinking?
I'm glad Monty raised the international piece of this, because after the movie came out, I did some work in Africa, and you go to Ghana, and in the National Museum of Ghana, you go up the steps, and there's a painting of our father. When I met Nelson Mandela, he said, "Oh, you are the son of Clayton Powell?" Yeah, the great Clayton Powell, Nelson Mandela. I'll give you just one more example. 1977, Menachem Begin becomes Prime Minister of Israel, and he comes to New York, and he asked to see three journalists. I was at CBS at the time. He asked to see Walter Cronkite, Barbara Walters, and me. And so the three of us go over to the hotel on Park Avenue. And actually, Walter and I went over in a cab together, and he's sort of looking at me, what's he doing here? So the three of us sitting on this couch, and Begin is sitting opposite us. And Cronkite and Walters are both sort of pitching for interview. Oh, please, you got to do my program. You got to do my show. He said, I'll do them. Thank you very much. And the three of us get up, and we head for the door. And he said, oh, Powell, can you stay? Oh, all right. And then I really got a look from Cronkite. What? So he and Barbara Walters leave. Begin closes the door. He said, I could not come to New York without meeting the son of the hero of the Irgun. Thank you very much. I mean, what? I mean, the Irgun were the bad guys. I mean, they were in the Israel's fight against the British for independence. So I went down to the lobby of the hotel, and I called my mother, and I said, what just happened? And she said, there are lots of things that your father did in other parts of the world for the United States, and no one will ever know about it.
Mm-hmm. Well, speaking of Nelson Mandela, it's little known, but in the late 50s and 60s, Adam Powell and the Abyssinian Church raised a lot of money for the ANC and other revolutionary movements, liberation movements in Africa. And maybe that's part of the story that also needs to be told in the next iteration. Adam the Fourth, what's on your mind?
Well, I mean, I got to tell you, 20 years later, there's still a great deal of interest. I talk to people all the time. Just yesterday, I was speaking to someone who told me, I'm going to, run home and watch it on YouTube. So, it's a story that needs to be told. As I've mentioned, he wrote the blueprint. Adam Clayton Powell Jr. wrote the blueprint for activism. You can arguably say he was the greatest Black politician of the 20th century, because many other figures were not necessarily political figures, like Dr. King, like Malcolm. They were outside the system, which is another thing that I believe made our father great. No one, I believe, in history that I know of has been inside the system and fighting the system almost if he's outside the system at the same time. And I'll close with this. Ebony Magazine had an issue in 2008. It was a collector's issue. They had 8 different covers, but it was the same August 2008. I remember because Barack Obama was running for president. He was a Democratic nominee, not president yet. Ebony Magazine's article was the 25 coolest brothers of all time. Remember that? 25, Black cool, 25 coolest brothers of all time. And in that article, there were a lot of celebrities from the sports field, Michael Jordan and Clyde Fraser, and from Hollywood, just celebrities, and Michael Jackson. Only 2 political figures made it to 25: Barack Obama, who wasn't president yet, and Adam Clayton Powell Jr. And what they wrote about our dad was something to the effect of what made Powell cool was he fought the power and he was the power, right, all at the same time.
Right.
And I think that summarizes it.
All right, thank you. Harry?
Yeah, that's great. I don't even remember that article, Adam, but
August 2008, look it up. It's a great article.
Check it out. I'm going to check it out. But for me, I think about the fact that Adam Clayton Powell put the funding together, made the National Endowment for the Arts and the Humanities happen. And so, in addition to Head Start programs and all kinds of stuff that's just great practices, best practices, stuff. So I'm a direct recipient, so to speak, of that. And I've taken that, I inspired by Adam Clayton Powell, I sometimes get a little preacher-like. And I'm going to talk about, the parable of Jesus he talks about 3 servants who get talents, the same amount of talent. One of them buries their talent and gives it back to the person that gave it to them, the governor, the landowner, and says, "You're a cruel taskmaster, and here's your money." The other one puts it in the bank, keeps it, and gets a little interest. And the third one invests it and triples it. And so, based on the seed that was planted by the great Adam Clayton Powell Jr., I have decided to use that example and to create the Lillian Marcy Center for the Performing Arts in my hometown of Chicago, Illinois, a multidisciplinary arts establishment, which we look to come to fruition in about 2 more years. And without the strategy, the inspiration, the motivation, much of which we forget that this man was maybe the greatest orator, preacher, second to no one when it came to exegetical studies, oratory, hermeneutics, and able to put that into actual practice. The Bible tells us, "Be ye not hearers of the word only, but doers of the word." And that's what Adam Clayton Powell did, and he was able to do it by combining church and state. It was Calvin Butts who took over at the church, Abyssinian Baptist Church, that you're in Black America, there is no separation of church and state. And so I'm going to try to put that into practice in my own way. So that's what I'm doing.
Very nice, Harry. Lastly, we started with mention of Billy D. Williams. We're going to end with it. I met when I was in Toronto doing the production. I met Billy D. In the lobby of the church of the hotel, and went up to him and introduced myself. And he asked me what was I doing there. And when I told him Adam Clayton Powell, I mean, he's much taller than me. He stepped back and a serious look on his face, and he just grabbed my arm and says, "Come with me." And we went into the lobby area and sat on the couch for 2 hours. And I talked about the journey to this film that he was very enamored of, because he attended Abyssinian as a child. He's a child of Harlem. And he's the one who told me that he had first been attached to play Powell in '73. And the late actor Yaphet Kotto, same thing. I met him in the lobby, and I ran up to him and to introduce myself. And I told him the exact same thing, and he did the exact same thing. He's a 6'4". Man, he just stepped back and grabbed my arm and says, "Let's go here," and talked with him for 2 hours, and wound up having a great friendship with him. A buddy of mine, Carl Clay of Black Spectrum Theater in Jamaica, Queens, he had a great science fiction script, and that Yaphet was interested in, and we spent a week in Toronto at Yaphet's home, going over the script, and had the greatest time. And he had all kinds of Powell stories, and I was there because he loved Adam Clayton Powell and loved that I did Adam Clayton Powell. So I've been a beneficiary of the Powell legacy in many, many, many ways. I care not to describe, because you'll want some of the money. So no money. But gentlemen, thank you very much. I haven't seen many of you personally in many, many years, although a couple of us are on Facebook together. And of course, Adam III takes wonderful dawn pictures of the forest around his home. And Adam IV I talk to, pretty often, and especially when I come to New York. But guys, I want to say it was a pleasure and an honor working with all of you on what is a great film and a mission and to some degree a calling from the ancestors for us to do this work, to bring to the public and to the new generations the stories of our heroes and our family members who have impacted and made their lives better. So thank you very much, and I hope the audience enjoys our discussion. And this was our discussion about the 20th anniversary of the film Keep the Faith, Baby, about the great Adam Clayton Powell Jr. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.